Hello, I'm Bruce Goldstein. Thank you for joining us today. I'm President of Farmworker Justice, the national advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Facebook program series, The State of Farmworkers in the COVID-19 era. Farmworkers have been designated as essential workers to ensure our nation's food security during the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet their working conditions and living conditions create grave risks to their health and economic status. Our programs will raise awareness about the serious challenges the pandemic imposes on farm workers and their family members each and every day. The series will identify impactful work and innovative ideas being carried out by Farmworker Justice and other organizations that represent and serve farm workers. It's my pleasure to have as our guest today, Nicholas Gonzalez. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today in my own home.
We appreciate it. Nicholas, who's from San Antonio, Texas, went to Stanford, studied at Oxford, became an actor. He's been in many films and TV series, and most recently has been quite well known for being the Good Doctor on ABC.
One of them.
So we very, very much appreciate Nicholas's joining us today, because he's been very active for a number of years on a range of issues that are central to farm workers, including immigration policy and issues at the border, and farm workers' health. So I wanted to start by asking you, Nicholas, what drew you to your humanitarian work around immigration and the border?
I know that from the time I entered Los Angeles over 20 years ago, the actual very reason I got involved was a dear friend of both of ours, David Damien Figueroa, who would be very embarrassed that I brought it up, but he has been the reason. He's been the one who has introduced me to so many people, not only in the political scene in Los Angeles, but of course in entertainment and theater, and yourself as well. That's how we met initially, Bruce, and he's been gotten me involved, and it's hard, I think, for anyone to stand by and watch what is happening, because this isn't just we're not here talking just because of COVID-19. Your work continues year round. We're just happen to be talking about an even more pressing need of needs that have been pressing for decades. So thank you, if I could say, also for all the work that you and everybody at the organization does surrounding this. But for me, it's just any way I can get involved. That's been my attitude towards it, and been very honored to be a part of this with you.
Well, thanks. And this is a great opportunity, because I didn't know some of that about our own development director, David Damien Figueroa. And
I speak for a lot of not only actors, but a lot of other people that he's got involved like that. And a lot of people who don't know that our voice can make a difference. We're not only asking for donations, but we're asking for people to be spokesmen as well, to go back into your communities and get people fired up. You may not have certain skills, but you know people who do. So you are a producer, you can put things together. And that's essentially what David does.
And we have a history of being a very collaborative organization, because although we have very talented people, we know that we don't know it all, and we're supposed to serve farm workers and their organizations. So a lot of what we do is to build collaborations around issues, build coalitions. Farm workers themselves don't have a powerful enough voice often to change the situations they're in. So we help them build power by bringing more people and organizations together. And
yet there's a crucial point of so many things for us as a nation. The backbone, our food, the very thing that keeps us alive, the life source, and yet not enough power to even warrant attention for equal rights or even civil rights. So it's very sobering to realize that's why so many different organizations have to get together to hit this problem from so many different angles, because it really is an uphill, not quite Sisyphusian task, but an uphill one, and that we do see progress, but as you know, sometimes incremental.
Right. Now, I wanted to ask you, before we get more deeply into the farm worker issues specifically, I wanted to ask you about your work around the US-Mexico border and immigration, because I know that you've been active on those issues.
Well, that's another instance where my work comes out of the dedication of other individuals who've started that work and brought me in. One of those being Lee Kilton Smith, who's a famous coach and a dear friend who married my wife and I. And she and her lovely husband, Adam Smith, adopted an orphanage down in Tijuana, Casa Hogar Sion, which is part of the Friends of El Faro network, which is a group of orphanages throughout Mexico, I think mostly near Tijuana. And but this particular orphanage, she took me in a group, over 10 years ago. And, I think one of the best things, a lot of people are looking for a way of how do you cope in times like this or coronavirus pandemic. People are looking for, there's so much we can't control. Well, what I always say is what you can control is someone else's happiness or the betterment of someone else's life. So if you can't control your own life, at least you can do that for someone else. And as you know, the only thing we have in control of our own lives is how we react to the things that happen to us. So here's a perfect opportunity. And I think that's something that was kind of hammered in by Lee Kilton Smith to a lot of us, was like, this is something you can control. And so it began with visiting the border, going to a particular orphanage, really just loving on the kids that needed a pat on the back, someone to play with, or to be told that they're worth something. And it's a really beautiful organization down there. And I watched the kids grow. We've had kids go on to then become estheticians. We have a doctor right now who's studying, college graduates, really beautiful stories coming out of a lot of stripes. So it's hard not to be involved whenever I can there.
That's great. Now, you've become a national spokesperson for the Masks for Farm Workers campaign during the COVID pandemic. What led you to get involved on the farm worker issue during the COVID pandemic?
Well, I was very fortunate to be approached by Antonio Tijerino from Hispanic Heritage Foundation, who, again, is another dear friend of over 20 years from the entertainment business, another person who's got me involved, advocacy with kids and education and scholarships, so many things. And he approached me and said, look, we kind of have this perfect opportunity, you doctor, and here we're talking about masks, and also knowing my want to get involved. Mario de la Torre, famous fashion designer, joined up with Justice for Migrant Women, Hispanic Heritage Foundation, and National Center for Farmworker Health. Monica Ramirez, who I'm sure many of you know, activist who started Justice for Migrant Women, also was my other key point. And we just talked and decided this might be a good union and to get the word out for, like we said, always a problem, but now in this time of COVID-19 is even more serious and life-threatening.
And we worked with Monica, and we work with a lot of groups around the country, and we try to get information, to then disseminate to policymakers, to other farm worker groups, to other not-for-profit groups, and the public. And what we're hearing is that at a lot of agricultural employers, they are not following the CD, the recommendations, the CDC's recommendations for physical distancing, for masks, for testing.
Some of the most simple things, even at the ground level, hand washing stations don't exist.
Right.
Definitely needed. Right,
and the federal guidelines for occupational safety and health for farm workers are very, very weak. So the main one is called the Field Sanitation Standard. It requires drinking water and toilets in the field and hand washing facilities. But it only requires one hand washing facility per 20 employees. And the hand washing facility can be as far as a quarter mile away. So what we're hearing that there are some employers who are trying to help protect the workers against COVID-19, but that unfortunately in a lot of places, workers are not getting information. They're not being encouraged to engage in social distancing. They're being placed in housing, or they already live in housing that's crowded. They're being transported from their homes to the fields in crowded buses.
In cars, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest difficulty too, is that, to practice social distancing when housing is, 8 or more people, and sometimes to a 1-bedroom. So bringing in programs, that's part of what we're looking to do. Masks for Farm Workers is a hashtag that covers a lot of different things, because like you said, we're working in conjunction with a lot of different organizations that are doing different things. And one of them being providing PPE for the medical clinics that serve farm workers. We have about 50% enclosures in these that are serving those communities, and another 50% that say they lack the PPE to go for another week. So already, their alternatives for healthcare are diminished there. Programs that we're also funding to hopefully get maybe motels or hotels or other areas where if people are tested, once we can get testing widespread enough, tested that they can recuperate, or people that have been exposed to other people that can self-quarantine, and allow that, because this is not only people, for one, which we should, I think a lot of people like to look at, well, this is our labor source in our food. Yes, of course, but these are people primarily, for one, and we need to take care, make sure that they are taken care of like everyone else. And it's frustrating to have to kind of hammer that constantly. And I'm sure that's a feeling you come up against many times.
Yes, I mean, there's a saying that a crisis is something to take advantage of. And, the fact that state governments and the federal government have designated farm workers as essential workers, and have designated the food and agriculture economic sector as a critical infrastructure sector, so that these workers are being told, you should work, we want you to work, you're feeding us, but then not to take the steps necessary to ensure that they are not subjected to COVID-19 by the very work that they're being told to do during the pandemic, and then not to have a requirement to provide health insurance, and not to have adequate health care available in these rural areas. It's incredibly frustrating, but it is an opportunity to advocate. So we and other groups are advocating very strenuously for these kinds of things, occupational safety and health requirements, not just recommendations. Paid sick leave.
This is one of the first times that farm workers are probably being treated like our healthcare professionals, on the front lines, not given what they need, not given, the proper regulations aren't fitting everything. It's, I think, a lot like this, for the first time, they're probably being treated that way, which isn't good in this instance,
Right. So, and part of it is to try to see it as an opportunity to wake up America and say, look, these people have been doing this work for years. They're here. They work hard. Farm work is actually, before the COVID-19 pandemic, it was one of the most dangerous jobs in the United States in terms of job fatalities and illnesses and injuries. It's among the lowest paid jobs in the country. So we're saying, isn't it time that we help farm workers improve their living and working conditions and their income? One of the things that we're also asking for is testing. Looks like Congress is about to pass another piece of legislation confronting the pandemic, and there may be additional money for testing. So we're going to be asking the administration to prioritize farm workers as well as other frontline workers for that medical testing. So anyway, we appreciate the effort that you're making to bring attention to farm workers and the solutions during the pandemic.
Just doing my part.
And tell us a little bit about what you've learned in the last few weeks of this pandemic, about the pandemic and its impact on farm workers.
Well, I mean, I guess a lot of people don't really realize when we talk. I think, some people know about the Central Valley in California, as being kind of what it provides, what percentage of the produce for America? Just the Central
Something
Valley.
like a half. Yeah,
You know,
a half
yeah,
or more.
over 40%, right? But there's so many areas scattered across America, and that there's 2 to 3, just under 3 million farm workers, 900,000 of which are women. So when you're already looking at all these different conditions, these harsh working conditions, on top of which are, chemical exposure, which can cause birth defects, and all this kind of compounded already, all these things lend themselves to further issues with COVID-19. They already make people, immunocompromised. They're already dealing with respiratory issues from the chemicals they're forced to inhale by conditions that aren't, provided for them on any given day. So this is a community that is even more susceptible, not just because of the job they do, but because of the conditions that they're forced to work in while doing that job. The idea that so many of these clinics were already closing at the very time when we need them more was kind of a frustrating realization. I think I'm constantly surprised when I sit down and Monica will take me through a little bit of where we're at, and the different, with every little celebration, there's another sobering statistic of, what's going on. And as you said, you're going to advocate for testing being made readily available to, and initially to farm workers. I see it as that's going to be another tough one, because people acknowledge how important this job is, but aren't willing to actually put their money and their real concern where their mouth is. I think of what else that, if you're not outraged by that enough, let me see if I can come up with some more. The nice thing is to see all these organizations working together, because as you said, there are so many different angles to hit. Again, the hashtag is Masks for Farm Workers, but masks are just the tip of the offense that needs to be played here. So I'm realizing as we go, just, every little post or another interview we do, we get comments from people on the ground saying, well, this is what we're dealing with, and we need a little bit more of this and that. And it's, it's the same problems we're seeing in hospitals, around the nation too. But a lot of people just have the luxury of staying home, and that security, even though a lot of people are scared, just gives so much more than they realize, that farm workers aren't able to do that. And that's one of the biggest, I think the saddest thing, with this whole subject is people are so detached and don't realize how this delicate system is balanced, how this all works. We just think food magically appears, and for all intents and purposes, for people it does. And they need to be intimately connected with the people that pack, plant, and produce their food. So I think it's a wake-up call. And like you said, the biggest thing for me is the realization I have coming out of this is I think it really is an opportunity from this point on to have a very different viewpoint by the average American of farm workers, and realize just how integral to their life, the people touching the soil, this American soil that we, talk so much about fighting for, and they're doing it on a daily basis.
Well, thank you for your work to help farm workers. Really appreciate it. I want to tell our audience that farmworkerjustice.org, our website, has a wealth of materials about farm workers and immigration and labor rights and occupational safety and health. We have a page dedicated to COVID-19 and information that's being circulated to farm workers, information about the advocacy that we and others are doing, the requests that are being made to state and federal governments. This work that we do on behalf of farm workers, it can only be done by the support of our listeners and viewers. So we hope that people will visit our webpage and donate to Farm Worker Justice to enable us to continue this work. We're very dedicated to it. We have very talented staff, but resources are very limited. So with that, I wanted to finish up and just say, Nicholas Gonzalez, thank you so much for joining us and for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, and everybody at your organization that's working so hard. Really appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.